So I mean, been on the show too long, guys. So before we introduce the next guest, who's a dynamic young man rocking out of West Harlem, I just want to bring to the attention of everybody this box in front of us. What's going on in this box?
It was my son's birthday not too long ago. Yes. He was blessed with so many confectionery gastronomical treats. I said to myself, how can I share my happiness?
With the world. And I did it via Melissa. So
this
is so kind of you.
From my son via Melissa to you through Cool Kurt.
Thank you. So, so the first thing that needs to happen here, we need to say happy birthday to your son.
Word.
How old is he now?
I don't want to talk about it right now.
Well, expose it.
Tell you how old you are there, Kurt.
Right.
So happy birthday to your son.
Yeah, he's 34. It's all good.
That's the
son. It's all gravy. He's 34.
I thought he was 45.
Wow.
That's the president.
That's Bird, exactly.
So the second thing is, can you open them up, please?
Yo, Will, crack these.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Crack that, Will.
So we're here today. We're joined by Mr. Ken Miles, who is a member of the Community Board 9. Because I always say giving shout outs to the chair, Padmore John. He's on the health committee. And, I just want to commend you for joining the community board. And I hope you continue to stay on it. I think we've all been some form and shape a member in our community status. And joining the community board is clearly a real commitment. And so thank you for the work that you do.
Yeah.
We know. We got at least 3 ex-members.
Maybe 12.
10. And so, and Curtis was 10. He don't want to talk about it.
Big shout to Joshua Clennon. Just got appointed to Community Board 10 as well.
All right. So it's a shame that we start knowing the appointees of community boards. That means we're really in the weeds, right? So can you come to us to speak to us regarding the Healthy and Clean Harlem campaign, which OnPoint Experience is a media sponsor of? And we just want to say that this has been a great experience having different folks come to the show to talk about it. Last week, as you know, we had Dr. Dukes, and in her enamored and exciting interview, she talked about the importance of people holding each other accountable in their community. So why don't you share with us a little bit of why you are involved and why this campaign is important to you?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thank you guys for having me.
No problem.
Definitely love seeing community board support. A lot of folks don't even know what the community board is, to be honest. But it's a labor of love, and it's definitely necessary. I think for me, so I serve kind of dual roles. I'm on the community board, health, youth education, and libraries as well, but I'm also an advisory member of the 125th Street Business Improvement District. And as I think about my own personal ties to Harlem, I was born in Harlem, my mom taught in East Harlem. I think a lot about what we need to kind of keep the community strong, keep the community going, particularly with all the changes that it's going through. And so the Healthy and Clean Harlem campaign is really an effort to just have fun and promote the need to make sure we take care of our streets. A lot of people associate, any type of cleanup with Earth Day. And we like to say, Earth Day should be every day.
Every day.
And I think that it's important for communities to go outside and to meet folks. And I had an interesting exchange in the community with this brother who was a sociologist, and he said he distinguished in our conversation between neighborhoods and communities, almost to the point of we have neighborhoods now. What does it take to get back to community? And so I think this is all in that effort to really bring us together, know one another, and enjoy taking care of the block.
Why is it important to have a community again?
I think community is at the essence of everything. It's being able to, know your neighbors, being able to trust that there are other people that are looking out for you as much as you're looking out for other folks. And like you guys were talking about earlier, both domestically, internationally, the fabric of our world is changing in some ways subtle, some ways not so subtle. So I think, trying to make local sexy, trying to bring everything back to the fact that it starts here with what we choose to do, even reaching one person can shift how we think about the world around us. That matters in terms of the change that we wish to make in the world.
You know that Dr. Dukes, she's utilizing her voice, her experience to speak out for the need to have this campaign. Tell us a little bit about what you do, and then how you connecting your life with this.
So, like I was saying, I was born in Harlem, raised on Long Island, but my mom taught, and actually as I got older, I started to realize some of the connections I had to the community more deeply. A couple of years ago, my great aunt gave me a book of sermons from St. Martin's Episcopal, which was where my great grandmother met my great grandfather. It's still around on 122nd and Lenox. And I remember I was talking about some social activism stuff. My homegirl was running this Boycott Black Friday initiative a couple of years ago, and I was telling her about it, and she was like, "Oh, you read about that in the book?" And I was like, "What book?" And she said, "The book of sermons I got you." This thing was covered in dust, binding was cracked, like I hadn't touched it. And so I opened it up, and sure enough, reading through it, it was just telling that something written in 1942 could be so applicable to what was going on at the time in 2016. And so it's kind of reminded me in some not so subtle ways about the kind of continuing narrative about what Harlem has been, what Harlem can be. I actually opened it up to a new chapter because I only touched one chapter, which was called Don't Shop Where You Can't Work. But, I opened it up, and there was a line in there in this passage about this sermon called The Truth About Harlem. It goes, "Harlem ought to be a shining example for the lesser Harlem scattered all over the country. It is so regarded by members of the colored race living in other sections of this land. They have taken renewed hope by reason of the cultural, social, and political progress that the citizens of Harlem have been able to accomplish." And so just hearing that was literally written in 1942. Wow. And thinking about the pride of Harlem and thinking about the pride of the community.
Sounds like the book of Adam Clayton Powell to me.
And just echoing those voices. And something I always say is like, a lot of times with new activism and modern activism, we think about it like constructing new frameworks. I always say it's like building a new football stadium. We think that in some cases, without the proper context, we're the first ones to experience it. We've got to build this new way of thinking about something where if we maybe looked at where the progress was made before, maybe we thought about it more like first downs, we can make progress, develop off of what came before us, because power sits back and they know that stadium's not going to be built. And I think that's important to think about context.
I think that's so right.
One of the things I want to say, listening to you speak, you say we, us. You speak like that, and I love that because it's a movement, right? So what methods do you use to keep people motivated in cleaning up Harlem?
Yeah. I think for us, it's all about engagement. It's all about, on one hand, we've got different tactics. We've got brightly colored and designed bags. So when you're going throughout the community, you can kind of tell, oh, this is connected to the campaign because,
right.
We've got these bright polka dot bags and it's fun. But the reality is, it's just telling neighbors, form teams, squad up, get your team together. Go to submittable.com, which is the platform that we're using to encourage folks to apply, and to really sign up. And it's 125thstreet.submittable.com. And the whole idea is, how do we make this fun? How do we make this in community? And I think teamwork, competitiveness, we're giving out prizes. Yeah. You got to encourage and incentivize folks.
Right.
We've got some entertainers coming out, Loaded Lux, who I remember from the Smack DVD days. Lux will be there, and other folks just in the community to support and say, hey, this is something that we really want to promote. This is something that we need to elevate.
I want to say, as far as the Clean Harlem campaign, whoever's taking care of the street team stuff is doing a good job. I actually looked
Corey Ortega,
Corey's-
my little brother,
He's
Shout
doing
out
his
to
thing.
Corey.
'Cause,
is
Shout out
rocking
to
it.
Corey.
I stepped in
Corey
front of my
Ortega,
house and
he's
they had the
rocking it.
audacity to tape something to my damn door.
I'll let him
You
know.
know, and then I went down to another block and it was on another door, and I was like, you
It
know
was
what?
on my door.
Yeah, so that's good.
Corey is doing the
Someone
work.
is doing
He's
their
doing the work.
job.
doing his job.
And
That's what
speaking
real
of doing
street
the
team
work,
about.
as a young person, I'm impressed of all the work you're putting in.
Yeah.
Like my man Loaded would say, someone's getting that work. I see. What propelled you to want to get involved in the community in this way? You almost appear to be a throwback, brother. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
you'd have been right at home, it seems like, back in the 60s, down with Schnick and all the other organizations. But here you are right now as a millennial doing amazing contributions to the community. I mean, if you just really listen to what the man said, he said he's part of the community board. Most people don't know what the community board is. He's part of the 125th Street bid. The bid is the Business Improvement District. So whenever you're working with commerce and you're working with community, you know, and he's already spiritual, you know, you got the three things.
Book of sermons.
Yeah, you got the three things that will propel you to success as long as you stay healthy.
That's true.
And so with that being said, I commend you, young man. I commend you.
That's what's up.
That's a big compliment.
I'm
What's
gonna knock
wrong?
on some wood around.
I'm just trying to get the hat. I'm just trying to
Yeah, the hat is, I like the hat,
I
bro.
knew that too.
Shout out to Flame Keepers. Black
Oh,
Women.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that's
You
what's
know,
up.
I think a lot of it, to get to your point, you know, I do consider myself a bit of an old soul, but a lot of it is just realizing, you know, there's so much work to do in Harlem. I think we think sometimes that, you know, who does the work? At the end of the day, it takes a village. Harlem
That's
is
right.
a village. And I think that we need to think a lot about, you know, as these transitions, which we all know are happening, are taking place, like who's shaping, who has a seat at the table. There are a couple of reasons for my involvement. Again, you know, unpacking my family history as I get older. My twin brother who passed, he was very involved at the time he was working with Yandy Smith and Jim Jones and the
Jim Jones,
Diplomats.
right.
So I grew up understanding, you know, Harlem and the many sides of Harlem and the diversity of Harlem and people that at the end of the day care about the community. But there's no one way that looks,
Right.
you know, and so I think about how important it is to make sure that we are represented, that our voices are represented at the table during the transitions that are happening in our neighborhoods. I mean, even just last night, you know, there was Arthur Jaffe, an artist, had a showing at Gavin Brown's Enterprise, which is a new studio space in the community, and Swiss Beats was there, and all these things. Like, there's a lot of exciting things that are happening in Harlem. But the thing that concerns me most is the reality that as these transitions, as these things emerge, I say that there's a moat that's forming around particularly a lot of the youth that are in the community that's kind of growing, and it's keeping them from other opportunities, right? And so as the moat grows, what ways are we thinking about bridging that opportunity gap? Because the youth aren't going anywhere. We've had presentations in front of the community board about what the projections are for youth in the community. So for all this talk of gentrification and all these transitions, the reality is these kids are still here. They need opportunity. Don't get me started on automation and the future of work, but there are real concerns that we need to be aware of and we need to talk about. And in order to do that, you have to be represented.
I think people use buzzwords a lot, right? And so gentrification and, relocation, those are things that put fear. And we don't talk enough about how do we solve the problem. Your statement is like, I feel like a lot better. You know what I mean? Because some young people, we've had young people that run for office, people that come in, and they just totally disregard what has happened in the past. And your efforts of building a bridge between the intergenerational communities are just so critical. Now, how do we remove the trend of Harlem? Like, everybody puts Harlem in something just to try to make it a trend.
Yeah.
It's so annoying to me. But how do you think we break out of the trends of using Harlem and capitalizing that as like capitalism?
Yeah. I mean, it's real. I'll never forget, I showed up to a tech event, and there was this brother from Southeast Asia who got out there and presented his platform that had Harlem in it. It didn't have nothing to do with Harlem. And I was just listening to him like, really? But at the same time, I think there's a power in the word, right? There's a power in the fact that there's a Harlem in Harlem.
True.
There's a Harlem in Amsterdam. There's a Harlem stop in Chicago. I know because I went there over the summer. There's a Harlem in Montana.
In Augusta, Georgia, there's a Harlem.
Exactly, and Harlem is local, but it's global at the same time. And I think for all the challenges of who's co-opting and for what reason, I think there's something to be said for taking pride in what we know Harlem to be and trying to bring us back to that point of connecting with that. And I think that requires kind of history. I think that requires knowing your history. I think that requires elevating those stories, and thinking about Frederick Douglass. I only recently discovered, he was part of a boat building cooperative. And it's so powerful to think about the fact that like the power of community, the power of cooperatives and cooperation, like we need that because that's where our predecessors and our ancestors came from. They didn't do it by themselves. They did it as collectives.
We have to do it together.
Well, you know what I appreciate about what your movement is that a lot of people want to own things, right? They want to own the name Harlem. They want to own Brooklyn. But you talked about having a sense of pride, right? So ownership, other than just owning the name, be proud of where you come from. So I appreciate the cleanup situation. It's like when you own a home, you want to clean up outside your home a little bit. When you're renting something, you look at things a little bit differently, right? So I think that what you're trying to do in connecting people and saying, let's just not talk about Harlem, but we have to own how it looks, right? We have a sense of pride about how other people look at it, how other people perceive it. So hopefully that's the generational gap sometimes because younger people, if they don't own, they tend to walk over other things that because somebody else owns them. Yeah. So are you finding it a problem to connect with the youth and that ownership of how their neighborhood is and how it looks? Because there's so many distractions with social media and things of that nature because it is a youthful movement.
I agree. I think that, I always stray away from some of the cultural aspects of like why youth are disconnected, in part because those cultural aspects were designed by people in positions of power and influence who didn't take consideration for the community. Okay. We had a community board meeting and this brother who does parks development, who helped structure the plan for Riverbank State Park, came before the community board to talk about the needs of improving certain areas. And I'm sitting back and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. When you look at the capital budget, like we need more improvements north of like 100th Street. And I was like, why is that? And then he explains that there were two different contractors that were used to develop the park. One below, say, 100th Street and one above. And then when you ask why, you find out, because Robert Moses was involved, and we know his history as an urban planner for the city.
Wasn't he just a great man? No, I'm confused.
And he had some racist tendencies, let's say that. And so we think about, again, like fast forward generations. Now we're dealing with the fact that there's greater degradation in parts of the park because you use shoddy contracting. And what does that mean for like the ways that our past is never truly our past? And so I say that to say, like, for today, I think, it's hard to reach folks, but I also know, like, we've got to knock on doors. We've got to be present. We've got to actually go into the community. We can't really speak from pulpits all the time, and that kind of engagement is necessary. One of my boys who grew up on the east side of Harlem, like, he got involved actually with the church because we need space. So, like, the church was a space. He wasn't particularly religious, but he saw, how do I pull youth into a space?
Right.
I think that's the void that's missing in our people and in our culture. That the black church is what got us over.
Started. That's right.
And because membership is dwindling in, big numbers.
Yeah.
And there was a time when faith alone meant something, Now we're living in a time where not so much. So it's good to see that you're still putting your faith in faith, and things of that nature. And as far as Harlem, I think that we just got to get rid of bad practices and bad cultural moves. For example, I get into arguments all the time with people who want to put out food to feed the birds. Like, right in front of your building, they want to put out like their old rice and their bread and something. And I'm like, yo, that's rat food. What you're putting out is food for the rat. Or I have
or raccoon food.
Raccoon food with Harlem, New Harlem, gentrification.
New Harlem gentrification.
Or I have a tree guard in front of my
Sure,
house.
it's
And
horrible.
people think a tree guard is another form of garbage can. It drives me batty.
Or urine for the
And my last one is we got these mosques coming.
Yes.
We got all these mosques. So what these cab drivers do, they
Yes.
pull up, they empty their ashtrays, right? They'll pee like in a Snapple bottle or something. They'll dump off right before they go to their place of worship. So I'm the local curse out brother on the block. And so we just have to change some of these cultures. Like you say, gotta
Talk lower.
Talk lower.
Gotta change.
So
Give
the
it a
local
chance.
curse out brother from the block. So Ken Miles, we want to thank you. Is there anything else that we need to know about Healthy and Clean Harlem?
As it relates to Healthy and Clean Harlem, again, it's happening. It's taking place on May 18th. Need everyone to come out. Encourage everyone to come out. It's really about bringing love back to the block. And quite honestly, I don't think that love left. I think that
definitely hasn't. No, it
I think that it's just important to elevate kind of that messaging and that opportunity to connect us to what's going on. I also want to shamelessly plug a startup I'm involved with called Hire Harlem, HIRE Harlem.com.
Nice.
A platform to support Black, Latinx, and women-owned businesses in the community. When talking
nice.
about bridging that opportunity gap, part of that is work. And thinking about how we support our small, medium-sized businesses, thinking about also long-term how we hold larger businesses accountable in our community and others. That way we can, the reality is the future is uncertain, but we got to provide the opportunities that we can to the youth while we can.
John Jay.
Ken Miles, everybody.
Like that, brother,
Thank
man.
you so much.
Yeah, lead a
Thank you,
hat,
guys.
too. Lead a hat.
Yeah, look at that.
Shout out to Flamekeepers.
We'll be right back. Queen Dream, take us out.
OnPoint Radio.